The food on your plate today might exist because of a World War II-era bioweapon, a seemingly innocuous fungus, weaponized for mass starvation, revealed a terrifying vulnerability in our global food system. Learn how this silent threat led to an agricultural revolution, permanently changing how we grow and secure our most vital resource, and, well, why its legacy still matters today. Picture a wheat field in Kansas, 1935. Golden stalks stretching toward the horizon, swaying in prairie wind. Then look closer. Dark lesions spreading across the stems, pustules erupting with reddish-brown spores. Within weeks, the entire crop collapses, stems too weak to support the grain heads. The harvest fails, not from drought or insects or human error, but from something ancient and patient. Puccinia graminis, wheat stem rust, a fungal pathogen that has stalked human civilization since we first planted grain. This wasn't new. Stem rust had caused catastrophic famines throughout recorded history. Roman agricultural writers documented its devastation. Medieval Europeans prayed to Saint Robigus for protection from red blight. American farmers in the 1890s watched entire regions lose their wheat harvests to rust epidemics that swept across continents on wind currents, jumping oceans, appearing wherever wheat grew. The fungus was a fact of agricultural life, unpredictable, uncontrollable, occasionally catastrophic. Then came 1942, and everything changed. Not because the rust changed, but because someone realized it could be a weapon. In laboratories across the United States, Britain and Canada, military scientists were exploring biological warfare with clinical precision. Anthrax, botulinum toxin, tularemia. These were, the obvious candidates, pathogens that killed humans directly and quickly. But some researchers were thinking strategically about different targets. Why kill soldiers when you could starve entire populations? Why target armies when you could destroy the agricultural base that sustained them? Wheat stem rust became a weapon not through genetic modification or laboratory enhancement, but simply through understanding its natural potential and imagining deployment at scale. The fungus already possessed everything a bioweapon needed. It spread rapidly through airborne spores. It survived diverse environmental conditions. It infected its target with devastating efficiency, and most critically, it could reduce food supplies on continental scales. The British programme, operating from Porton Down, conducted field trials on Greenard Island off Scotland's coast, though their primary focus remained anthrax. American researchers at Camp Detrick in Maryland took wheat rust more seriously. They cultivated the fungus in controlled environments, studied its spore production capacity, mapped its dispersal patterns, calculated the tonnage of wheat that could be destroyed per kilogram of weaponized spores. The mathematics were honestly terrifying. A single aircraft carrying rust cultures could theoretically devastate millions of acres of wheat across enemy territory. The strategic logic was, brutal but sound. Modern industrial warfare consumed enormous resources. Armies needed food. Civilian populations supporting those armies needed food. Destroy the wheat harvest, and you didn't just create immediate hunger. You destabilized economies, fractured social order, and forced governments to divert resources from military operations to emergency food procurement. Starvation as strategy. But deployment raised massive complications. Releasing a fungal pathogen with global dispersal capacity meant it wouldn't respect borders. Wind patterns that carried spores across enemy wheat fields would eventually carry them back across your own. Unlike chemical weapons that dissipate, or biological agents targeting humans that can be quarantined, a crop pathogen released anywhere could potentially reach everywhere wheat grew. Using wheat rust as a weapon risked destroying your own food security along with your enemies. This recognition that weaponizing rust posed existential danger to everyone, not just intended targets, may have prevented its wartime deployment, but the research wasn't secret enough. Intelligence services on all sides knew about the programs. Agricultural scientists understood the implications. The threat, even unrealized, was enough to trigger panic among those who understood what it meant. That panic saved us. Before the war, wheat breeding focused primarily on yield and regional adaptation. Disease resistance mattered, but it competed with other priorities. The spectre of weaponized rust changed that calculus overnight. If an enemy could deploy rust at will, conventional breeding programs would be worthless. Fields could be destroyed faster than traditional resistance could be developed. The only defense was crops with such robust, durable resistance that even deliberately weaponized strains couldn't overcome them. Research programs exploded across allied nations. The Rockefeller Foundation, already funding agricultural research in Mexico, pivoted toward rust resistance as a national security priority. Norman Borlaug, a young plant pathologist who would later win the Nobel Peace Prize, began the systematic breeding work that would define his career. His approach was revolutionary. Rather than breed for resistance to specific rust strains, he bred for broad-spectrum resistance using diverse genetic sources, creating wheat varieties that could withstand multiple pathogen races simultaneously. This wasn't happening in isolation. In research stations across North America, scientists were crossing wheat varieties from different continents, screening thousands of experimental lines for rust resistance, tracking the genetic basis of that resistance, and building libraries of resistant germplasm. The work was honestly exhaustive and urgent, driven by the knowledge that somewhere military researchers might be perfecting deployment methods for a weapon that could starve millions. The breakthroughs came faster than anyone expected. By the late 1940s, researchers had identified specific genes conferring rust resistance. By the 1950s, they were incorporating these genes into high-yielding varieties through systematic crossing programs, and by the 1960s, they were deploying these varieties across Mexico, India, Pakistan, and other nations facing food security crises. This became the Green Revolution, a transformation of global agriculture that increased wheat and rice yields dramatically, preventing predicted famines and feeding billions. The standard narrative credits Norman Borlaug's vision and the Rockefeller Foundation's funding. That's accurate but incomplete. The urgency, the resources, the political will to revolutionize agriculture on a global scale, all of that emerged from the terror of weaponized rust. The bioweapon that was never deployed created the research infrastructure that reshaped how humanity feeds itself. The rust-resistant varieties developed in the 1950s and 1960s became the genetic foundation for modern wheat. Nearly every commercial wheat variety planted today carries resistance genes first identified and deployed during that desperate period when rust was seen as an existential threat. Your morning toast, your pasta, your cereal, all made from wheat, descended from varieties bred to survive biological warfare. But the story doesn't end with triumph. Puccinia graminis didn't disappear, it evolved. The fungus reproduces sexually on an alternate host, barberry bushes, creating new genetic combinations with each generation. Some of these combinations overcome resistant genes that previously protected wheat. In 1999, a new rust strain called UG99 appeared in Uganda with virulence against most deployed resistance genes. It spread across Africa, jumped to the Middle East, threatened Asia. Suddenly, the nightmare scenario from the 1940s felt real again, not as a weapon, but as natural evolution exploiting the genetic uniformity of modern wheat. This sparked another research mobilization. The CGIAR network, International Agricultural Research Centers, established partly in response to the original rust threat, coordinated efforts to track UG99, screen germplasm for resistance, develop new varieties. The race continues. As resistant varieties are deployed, rust evolves to overcome them. Breeders incorporate new resistance genes. The cycle persists. An evolutionary arms race between human ingenuity and fungal adaptation. Modern tools have, really accelerated this battle. Genome sequencing now reveals the genetic basis of both rust virulence and wheat resistance at, molecular resolution. CRISPR gene editing allows for precise modification of wheat genomes, potentially creating resistance that pathogens just can't easily overcome. Satellite monitoring tracks rust movement across continents in real time, enabling early warning systems, and artificial intelligence analyzes climate data to predict where new outbreaks will emerge. Yet all of this, the entire infrastructure of global wheat disease surveillance, the international research networks, the genetic libraries of resistant germplasm, the rapid response breeding programs, traces directly to that moment in the 1940s when someone imagined rust as a weapon and triggered the realization that our food system was honestly, catastrophically vulnerable. Climate change amplifies these vulnerabilities. Warming temperatures extend the geographic range where rust can survive. Changing precipitation patterns create conditions favoring disease outbreaks. Extreme weather stresses wheat plants, making them, more susceptible to infection. The crop varieties we rely on were bred for yesterday's climate. Maintaining food security requires continuous innovation and really perpetual vigilance against evolving pathogens in shifting environments. Other threats compound this challenge. Wheat blast, a fungal disease that emerged in Brazil and recently appeared in Asia. Wheat streak mosaic virus spreading as climate change expands the range of its insect vector. Bacterial diseases developing resistance to the few effective treatments available. Each represents a potential crisis similar to what weaponized rust threatened 8 decades ago. The lesson isn't about specific pathogens or particular crops. It's about the fragility of systems we take for granted and the necessity of maintaining research capacity to address threats before they become catastrophes. The scientists who developed rust-resistant wheat in the 1940s and 1950s didn't eliminate the problem permanently. They bought time and created tools. Each generation must invest in understanding new threats, developing new solutions, maintaining the knowledge infrastructure that allows rapid response. This matters beyond agriculture. The same pattern repeats across domains: pandemic preparedness, climate adaptation, cybersecurity, asteroid detection. We face slow-moving but potentially catastrophic threats that require sustained investment in research, monitoring and response capacity, investments that seem wasteful until the crisis arrives, at which point it's often too late. The weaponized rust story offers, well, a strange kind of hope. When we recognize threats clearly and commit resources to addressing them, we can achieve truly remarkable things. The agricultural revolution that now feeds 8 billion people, it actually emerged from confronting the possibility of biological warfare. Necessity, you see, drove innovation. Fear catalyzed transformation. But, the story also warns against complacency. The rust hasn't gone away. Neither of the other threats to food security. The infrastructure we built in response to one crisis, it must be maintained and adapted for new challenges. The research networks, the genetic libraries, the breeding programs, the surveillance systems, all of this requires ongoing investment and public support. Cut that investment and, well, we're vulnerable again. When you bite into bread, you're consuming the product of one of humanity's most successful defensive mobilizations, a mobilization triggered by a weapon that was never used, but whose threat reshaped agriculture permanently. That bread exists because scientists in the 1940s took biological warfare seriously enough to revolutionize how we grow food. It continues to exist because their successors maintain that vigilance against evolving threats. The fungus that could have starved millions instead, through the fear it provoked, helped feed billions. That's not irony. That's the human capacity to transform existential threats into opportunities for innovation, when we choose to confront rather than ignore the dangers we face. If this story of unintended consequences and human ingenuity revealed connections you hadn't considered, subscribe to Through Time. Share this with someone who needs to understand that the crises we prevent are as important as the battles we win, and that food security isn't a solved problem, but an ongoing achievement requiring constant vigilance. The rust is still out there, still evolving, still waiting. The question isn't whether we can defeat it permanently, but whether we'll maintain the commitment to stay ahead